Good morning, Journey Church. Good morning. We are so delighted that you have joined us here today. We know that it's not by mistake or accident that you are here, but because God has a word for you. We are launching our holiday sermon series right now, this week, starting today. So we have a month to contemplate and to think about all the goodness that God is doing and what he has done during this season. And so we're just excited to just begin this holiday series. So what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about Christmas lights. And I'll get into that in a moment. But I'll just tell you, one of the things that Maria yesterday was doing was setting up the house, getting it all decorated with holiday cheer and putting up the Christmas trees, putting up the lights. And, I just love this time of year because it's a lot of times we anchored it with Thanksgiving, where you can get together with family, and we spent a smaller Thanksgiving together this year, where we're just our family today, this season, during the COVID season. And I know this holiday season will be different for many of you, where you're not as gathering, may not be gathering for Christmas or for Christmas Eve or anything like that, but it still reminds me of all the food and the music. The holiday cheer, the movies are already on, the Christmas series are already on, Rudolph and all those other things, Drummer Boy, everything like that is taking place right now. And I'm just excited about it because although it's different, one of the things that we recognize that this season brings also with it some challenges. And even some painful memories and some painful adjustments during the season. For some reason, right around Thanksgiving, and maybe because they're bookended Thanksgiving and Christmas, when we are always focused on family, we recognizing that many family stories are just complicated. Or complicated. And if you're like me and I mean, there are just differences in every family, and there's just some complicated stuff that comes out and emerge. It seems like we can escape it for most of the year, but this time of year is the time that you can't, because you're always thinking about family. And I know, for me and my family, this is really good right now because my kids are older. I don't have to worry about running all over the place. But when they were younger, it was really challenging. We lived in Michigan at the time, and we used to come home for the holidays, and we had to decide whether we were going to stay at my parents' house or her parents' house or her mom's house, or, and we ended up defaulting just saying, let's stay at friends, let's keep it safe, so then we don't have to say, well, this year you stayed there, next year you got to go here. We decided not to play that game. We said, no, we're going to stay with friends, and then we'll visit all the different places. And I know for you, you're probably looking at this and saying, yeah, that is exactly what I have to deal with on a regular basis. But we decided at that time that, it was going to be challenging no matter what we look at it. Who gets Christmas, right? Or who gets Christmas Eve? I just happen to be married to a woman that's Italian. And they choose not to necessarily celebrate on the day. So my parents always got Christmas Day, right? But Christmas Eve was a challenge, especially when my kids were younger, when it was just Brianna. I could tell you my daughter was the first grandchild, and she was being pulled and wanted at the different parents' house. And once again, Maria, at that time, her parents were separated or divorced, and, we had this challenge. They have seven fishes they celebrate on Christmas Eve, the 7 fishes. And that means all these different types of fishes that you can eat on Christmas Eve in the meal. And so with these 7 fishes, it's like, do we go to her father's for 3 fishes, and then we pick up and go to her mom's for the other 4 fishes, or do we, or do we stay this year for all 7, and then we just go to mom's for the Christmas opening up of Christmas presents? And that challenge was just, I'm just telling you, it was uncomfortable. It was complicated. It was, some people may say, a little dysfunctional, but it was stressful no matter what. And it brought with it its challenges. And I know for many of you, you face these same things. You're saying, Pastor, my decisions were so much worse. I didn't have a family to go to because of this that took place. I didn't want to show up that way. But this time still brings those feelings of just drama, hurt, and misunderstandings, and you're trying to prepare for all those things. It's just complicated. But it's still a wonderful time of year, right? You sit there and go, how can it be so wonderful, Pastor, when I have all these challenges? It is because it's not so much of what's happening in the circumstances that surround you, but it's mainly what has happened. You see, one of the things that we realize is that the problems, we can't solve them anyway. And that I set expectations for others that they can't meet. And so what is my role in this season as well? And I recognize that these are all challenging times for many of you. In fact, this Christmas season will look different for a lot of you because you're saying Peter, we have Luke, and then we have who was investigated it on his own. He was almost like an investigative journalist. He investigated it. And then you have John, another eyewitness. And so today I want to take us to John. And I want us to focus on how John decided to sit and write about this story. In fact, when you look at John, when he sat down to write his book, he started writing, he was about 70 years old. And so he was an older gentleman, and he sat down and he says, I got to capture, I'm quite sure he was told over and over again, can you just tell me the story again? Can you just tell me what happened? You got to realize John was the guy who Jesus, when he hung on the cross, he said to Mary, his mother, he says, there's John, treat him like a son. And John, I want you to treat my mother as if you're her son. He put Mary in John's care. And John, after the death and resurrection of Christ, decided to go away, and he took care of Mary. Could you imagine it? He has an ear. John recognized that the Roman Empire had came in and surrounded Jerusalem, and he could have been in Jerusalem or he could have been near in that vicinity, but they surrounded Jerusalem, and they collected all the Jewish zealots, and they put them in Jerusalem, and they began to starve them out. They began to crucify people. They hung them on the cross and crucified them in a wall that they built around Jerusalem. And during this moment, John decides to write his account of Jesus. When you think about all of the Jewish people that had become slaves, over 92,000 Jewish people became slaves to the Roman Empire or killed. They said almost 1.1 million people were killed during this time. It was a dark season. There was significant uncertainty happening in the history of the Jews. But yet John continued to be faithful and to see that there was something to hope for. John continued to look out and said, even though I lost a lot of friends and I lost a lot of family members, and I could see that it's a dark day, and for not just for me, but for the world. Yet John he gives us a glimpse into the mind of God. John stops and John pauses, and he tells us in just a few words just the whole heart of the gospel. When you read the Bible, whether you're starting in Genesis to Revelation, John captures the whole theme of the Bible in one word. He says, God is love. John takes us and he reminds us that God so loved the world that he gave. He gave his only son. John brings that scripture, one of the most popular scriptures that we know in our society. John brings that to life for us in a simple verse. He basically say, do you know that if you read my book, if you walk away with nothing else, just remember this season is all about God's love being illuminated. God's love being demonstrated. God's love being manifested in this present world. He's saying this is the time we could see God's love. And he summarized it at the end of his chapter, at the end of his book. He summarized it in John, the 20th chapter and the 31st verse. It says, but these are written so that you may continue to believe. John saying, even in my darkest hour, even though everything that I knew and I grew up with and I thought I was certain with, even though those things were uncertain, he says, I still believe. He says, and so I want you to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's the Son of God. He says, and in him you will have life. Now, he's not talking about physical life because he's talking to the people that are living right now. So he's saying that you can have a better life. You can have an enriched life. Yes, life seems dark. Yes, the culture seems like it's in chaos. And yes, things don't seem right for you and for me. But he's saying there is still life that you can have in the power of his name. Yes, things are happening around us. But John says, even in these dark times, he says, I want you to remember that Jesus was born during dark times. He says Jesus was born when people were economically insecure. Yeah, see, there was a census going on. And the only reason why you do a census is to do what? Collect taxes. And we know from the story of the early story of Joseph and Mary when Jesus was going to the temple, they brought doves, which means they were poorest of the poorest. It was the lowest offering that they can bring to be sacrificed. So we know that they were poor and they were economically and financially insecure. And yet they then had to take a journey to their hometown, Bethlehem, to be counted. When Mary is physically uncomfortable to travel. Now, you know, you get someone 9 months pregnant, and you're trying to travel, and he got Mary on a donkey, trying to travel. You can't travel in a car. You're like, I don't want to be that we have today. And she's uncomfortable, and he has to deal with a journey for someone that is uncomfortable. I'm quite sure it caused a little tension. Because I can tell you, when Maria was 9 months pregnant and we were in a heat wave, let's just do a sidebar here. And we were in my house. I had to pick out the air conditioning unit out of the window in the bedroom and take it to the room that she was in. And every time she moved room to room, I had to take the air conditioning unit out of that room and move it to the next room. And I'm telling you, that was just to keep peace. So, could you imagine what Joseph was dealing with? And then there was a king who was just upset because he was only about 5 miles away, and he's hearing about this birth of a child, and he's getting upset he's a little bit cantankerous because he's the king and he wants to decide his legacy. He wants to decide who will be the king of the Jews next after him. And yet, he's hearing about another king already being born. Tension was hot. Tension was high. But God demonstrated his love. Even though Herod the Great was wanted to murder, and he did murder all the kids 2 years of age and younger. Think about that. All because this man came, this baby was born to demonstrate God's love for you and for me. Herod sent his butchers into Bethlehem to wipe out all male children that was young. So if you just look like you were 2 or younger, he didn't care. They killed you. They killed that kid, and if you got in the way, they would kill you too. But John says, I don't want to talk about the condition in which Jesus was born. I want to just tell you the message that this meant, the significance of the meaning. And let's go there in John 1:4. John says, in him was life. In him was life. He's saying that there's something different that you can have. There's something bigger and better that this child is ushering in for you. He says, and it can't be contained, even though it's dark, even though the situation isn't the best. He's saying, I want you to know he came. In him, Jesus, was life. Let's go on. And it says, and that life was the light of all mankind. He says this newborn baby was so powerful, it wasn't about him breaking through the darkness, just the darkness. He's saying, but this life was the light for the world. He's saying not just the light for the Jews. He wasn't the light. He didn't come to just give life to the Jews and to bring light to the Jews. He says, no, I want to bring life to the world, not just my region, not just my community. He says, but to the world, all mankind. No one is excluded. All have access. He says, he is the life and the light. He says, and the light shines in darkness. He says, do you know? Now, you got to remember, let's go back. John is 70 years old, experiencing such tremendous loss. He's experiencing a whole different lifestyle now. Many of the Christians are running for their lives and are displaced. And John says, the light shines in the darkness. He says, there is hope for you that despite or in spite of death, in spite of sickness, in spite of disease and displacement, in spite of uncertainty, he says, in spite of the regional conflicts that you have, or the injustices that you're experiencing, or the social unrest, in spite of all of that, in spite of family dysfunctions, the light shines through. He says, I want you to get this. The light shines through those dark days. He says, I know you're going through a spell of depression right now. He says, but the light shines through. He says this is the reason for the season. He says this is the reason that you need to focus on and shift your attention to. This is the most wonderful time of the year because we can reflect on love illuminated. We can reflect on God showing his love despite all of the problems that you face, all of the challenges that you face. The light still shines. There is hope for you. He has not abandoned. He has already sent his son. A lot of us are looking for a new solution from God or a new answer from God, but God is saying, just look what I have already done. He says, the light still shines. I know you've been trying to blow it out. I know people have been trying to blow it out. I know culture has been trying to squelch the light. He says, but the light shines through. He says, look at this. And he says, and the darkness, no matter who try to assail against it, he says, it has not overcome it. He says, I know in my challenges, in my old age, what I'm experiencing, he says, and I can tell you, the light still shines. He says, I know that there are things that you're sitting there and you're worried about, and you're sitting there going, I don't know what tomorrow may bring for me. I don't know what next year is going to look like for me, but the light still shines. I know there's an empty seat at some of your tables this season and this year, but the light shines through, not just for the Jews, but for all. It burns bright. And it will never be overwhelmed. It will never succumb to the darkness. He's saying, the light and the life still shine. So at Christmas, as we're experiencing these complications, and we're experiencing unmet expectation, and as we miss loved ones, and as we are to be reminded that the darkness will never overcome the light. He's saying, I want you to be reminded of the love that God has for you. Nothing will overwhelm the light that God gives. So, what should we do? We should celebrate God this season. When we hear the songs, we should be thinking about him. When we see lights in our community, when we see the lights on the Christmas tree, when we're reminded and we go into the store and we hear another song, instead of looking at what we're going to get, look at what was already given. The light and the life that penetrates through the darkness. When you're sitting there wondering, I can't believe this country, I can't believe, to say, I know this time of year Jesus came for me. God has illuminated the planet. Things changed ever since that day in Bethlehem. And we are privileged to still see the light shine. And I want to invite you to embrace it. All you have to do is say, Lord, forgive me for living independent from you. Forgive me for not putting my attention towards you and what your ways are. Lord, I recognize that you sent Jesus at this season, in this time of year, to be the light for me. Not only to light the way, not only to demonstrate what you're like, but he also died on the cross. He died for me and for you. And I want to receive that gift that he's done, the gift of righteousness, in which, because he bore my sins on the cross, I can now take the gift, the free gift of righteousness that he gives. Lord God, grant that to me today. I open up my heart, I accept him, and I now want to encourage you to show yourself, Lord, so that I can walk in your way. Teach me your way, so that I may run after you in everything that I do. And I'm going to be careful to give you all the praise, the glory, and the honor. And for those that are struggling this season, and this season is challenging and complicated for you, I pray that God gives you the peace, that even in the darkness, that you have a peace that is just surpass all understanding, and that gives you, he marks your path straight, that he gives you a way to walk and to live, that you can embrace this life that is abundant, and that you accept that it's already a free gift to you, and that you see him in the midst of the darkness. That's what we pray for you. And I'm going to ask you next week to come on back as we continue this series, Christmas Light, the light of Christmas, where we're understanding why Jesus came during this season. Let's worship together.